This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. In this series, I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today is January 2nd, written in shorthand as 1/2 in the United States, so I thought it would be a good time to look at creatures that have that same stat line. A 1/2 creature might sound like a small, insignificant one, but there are some super powerful 1/2s in this game, as this list can attest. This is one of the more stacked lists that I've done in a while, with the top 4 cards all having more than 100 points. To be eligible for this list, a card simply had to have 1 power and 2 toughness. The mana value of the card doesn't matter, only the power and toughness. In all, there were 459 cards eligible for this list, and in this video we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like Grand Prix. Alright, let's get to our list. At number 10, it is Atog. This 2-mana 1/2 can gobble up artifacts to get +2/+2 until end of turn. Notably, this was the first Atog printed, with many printed over the years, and almost all of them are 1/2s that let you consume some type of resource to give them a stats boost. If Atog's controller has a bunch of artifacts, it is a really scary threat. It didn't gain any points as a result of its original printing in Antiquities, but when it was reprinted in another artifact-centric set about 10 years later, it found some success. That set was, of course, Mirrodin. It was played in some versions of Affinity in both Standard and Extended. These decks were artifact aggro decks, so Atog was right at home, especially when combined with a modular creature like Arcbound Ravager. However, Atog went a long time without gaining points after 2008, that is until Pauper became a format supported by Wizards of the Coast in 2017. Pauper is, of course, a format where only commons are legal, and Atog became a powerful card in Pauper versions of Affinity. In fact, it became such a problem in Pauper that it was banned in the format just a few months ago. This doesn't bode well for Atog going forward, as it doesn't have much of a shot at seeing play elsewhere. And there are several cards within striking distance of it, including Knight of the Ebon Legion and Emry, Lurker of the Loch. At number 9, it is Azusa, Lost but Seeking. 3 mana for a 1/2 is a bad rate, but her text box is incredibly powerful, so it doesn't really matter. She allows you to play 2 additional lands on every turn. That means the turn you play her, you can play 2 more lands if you've got them. Effects like this are not quite as good as they look, because making sure you have the lands to take advantage of such an effect is not always easy. As a result, Azusa didn't really see any play shortly after being printed. However, some years later, a deck emerged in Modern that could put her to good use, Amulet Titan. This is a deck that looks to combine Amulet of Vigor with the Ravnica bounce lands. When you play one of these with the Amulet in play, it untaps, which means you can tap it for the mana before it returns to your hand. Obviously, this combines well with Azusa, since you can just play that land and get the mana over and over again. You really only need that land to get all of that mana. This lets you produce a ton of mana very quickly, which you can eventually use to power out Primeval Titan or other threats. Amulet Titan has been a major force in Modern since 2014, and it looks like that's going to continue, meaning Azusa is going to continue to accumulate points in the future. At number 8, it is Kitesail Freebooter. This one too comes with flying and a powerful disruptive ability. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a non-creature, non-land card from your opponent's hand, and it gets exiled. Taking away your opponent's best non-creature, non-land card is very disruptive, and even if they have 2 removal spells and you can only get rid of 1, you are still making your opponent use a removal on your 1/2, so it doesn't feel too bad. And that's pretty much the fail case. Normally, the Freebooter will cause your opponent more problems than that. The Freebooter didn't actually put up any points in Standard after it made its debut in Ixalan. It did gain some points in Standard as a result of its reprint in Core Set 2021, but once again it was far from a fixture in the format. However, it was almost immediately a key card in Modern Humans. These decks were made up entirely of humans and human payoffs, and most of the humans also came with highly disruptive enter the battlefield abilities, which lets you add to the board while making your opponent's life more difficult. You could even put the Freebooter into play at instant speed using Ether Vial, making the disruption even more potent. Human decks are at the top of the pile in Modern for about 2 years between 2017 and 2019, and the Freebooter went along for the ride. Human decks are still around in the format, but they aren't as dominant as they once were. It also has a single point from a Pioneer human deck. The Freebooter is going to keep gaining points, but probably not at an impressive rate. At number 7, it is Psychatog, the second Atog to make the list. This one consumes cards in your hand and in your graveyard to increase its stats. Psychatog gained most of its points as the win condition in an eponymous control deck in block, standard, and extended. These decks were typical control decks for most of the game. They countered spells, swept the board, removed creatures, and then eventually they would swing a single time with Psychatog and buff it enough to take the opponent out all at once. This could be achieved alongside Upheaval, where you could return all the cards on the board to your hand, giving you plenty of fuel to make Psychatog lethal. Truth is, though, most versions of the deck didn't do that. They simply didn't need to. This was one of the most important cards in all of Magic between 2002 and 2007, but it has been a long while since it last gained points. If you want to learn more about the intricacies of Psychatog decks, check out my deck history video that covers the topic. At number 6, it is Priest of Forgotten Gods. This 2-mana 1/2 is one of the best sacrifice outlets there is. You can tap it and sacrifice 2 creatures to make your opponent lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature, while you draw a card and get 2 black mana. This effect gives you enough gas to keep adding to the board, which also keeps fueling the Priest. The Priest has been a key card in sacrifice decks in Standard, Pioneer, and Historic. These decks get even more bonuses out of sacrificing stuff to the Priest, with cards like Mayhem Devil and Korvald, making the Priest's ability even more insane. It's going to keep gaining points in Pioneer and Historic in the future, so it may move up this list. At number 5, it is Metalworker. This is one of the most powerful ways to ramp colorless mana in all of Magic. You can tap it and reveal artifacts from your hand, then for each artifact you reveal, you get 2 colorless mana. That can be pretty insane in the very early stages of the game. Over the years, it has powered artifact decks in Standard, Extended, Legacy, and Vintage. It would have done even more in Extended and Legacy too, but it got permanently banned in Extended and was banned in Legacy between 2004 and 2009. It has had the largest impact though on Vintage, a format where it's one of the key cards in Mud decks, which specialize in playing a bunch of artifacts and ramping a ton of colorless mana to power out massive threats. There are a couple of different origin stories about this deck's name. One is that it's called Mud because of the brown borders on the old artifacts, and the other is that it stands for Metalworker Ultimate Domination. I can find older sources going with the Metalworker name, but it's hard to tell which came first. In the end, the name seems to reference both Metalworker and the frames. Regardless, the point is the worker does a great job of making boatloads of mana for the deck, and it's going to keep gaining points in the future. At number 4, it is Thraben Inspector. This one too only costs 1 mana and brings a clue to the battlefield. That means it ends up netting you a whole card in addition to the 1/2 body on the board. This is especially nice because white doesn't usually have access to good card draw. It was pretty much a staple while it was in Standard, showing up in just about any creature-based deck that had white in it. This included human tribal decks, artifact-based aggro decks like Mardu Vehicles and Mardu Ballista, where the Inspector gave you a body that could crew your vehicles, and the artifact it gave you mattered too. The Inspector also gained a few points in Modern Humans between 2017 and 2018, and most recently it's found its way into both Historic and Pioneer, White Weenie, and Human decks, where it is actively putting up points. At number 2, I have 2 cards because they're very similar and even find themselves played in the same deck sometimes: Monastery Swiftspear and Soulscar Mage. Both of them are 1-mana 1/2s with Prowess. The Swiftspear also has haste, and Soulscar Mage trades that in for the ability to turn burn damage into -1/-1 counters. Both are great in aggressive decks that seek to cast a lot of burn spells, and they tend to always attack as much larger creatures than just 1/2s. They've both been played in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Historic. The Swiftspear also has a few points in Legacy. If I'd separated the two, the Swiftspear would have been at number 3, and Soulscar Mage would have been at number 5, in between Thraben Inspector and Metalworker. At number 2, it is Stoneforge Mystic, a 2-mana 1/2 that tutors up equipment when it enters the battlefield, and it can also help you put equipment into play at a discount. There is a lot of powerful equipment in the game, so only being able to tutor up equipment really isn't that restrictive. especially because it also helps you cheat that equipment into play. In general, a 2-mana 1/2 that draws you one of the best cards in your deck every time you play it is awesome, and that's what this is. The Mystic was a key card in many standard decks, many of which ended with Blade, because the deck could run equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine, which could be found by the Mystic. Despite the name, the deck more frequently searched up Batterskull, since getting it into play on turn 3 was a hard thing to contend with. The most famous of these decks was Caw-Blade, a deck so dominant that it eventually got Stoneforge Mystic banned in Standard. No matter the format for Stoneforge Mystic, and these days it sees play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, it is frequently searching up the Batterskull. It was banned in Modern for 8 years, but it was unbanned in 2018 and is seeing lots of play there now, both searching up powerful equipment to put on creatures and Sword of the Meek to enable the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo. Stoneforge Mystic is still rapidly adding to its score, and I think there's some chance it could catch the #1 card on this list, since it's seeing play just about everywhere it possibly can. But for now, the #1 card on the list is Deathrite Shaman, which is one of the most powerful creatures in all of Magic's history, so I don't think you'll get much pushback for saying this is the best 1/2. It is really good because it has a lot of abilities, so many that it's jokingly referred to as the only 1-mana Planeswalker. And sometimes it does feel like it's generating similar value to a loyalty ability every turn. The Shaman can exile cards of various types from the graveyard for value. Deathrite Shaman can function as a mana dork, allowing you to play 3-mana spells on turn 2, assuming you or your opponent uses a fetch land, something that is incredibly likely in formats like Modern and Legacy. And it can also provide a win condition, slowly killing your opponent by exiling cards in your graveyard, or it can help you stabilize, providing you much needed life. On top of all of that, it also happens to provide some graveyard hate, since it has to exile cards from graveyards when it uses these abilities. While it found some success in Standard, its power has been most abused in Modern and Legacy, formats with access to easy ways to load the graveyard, including those fetch lands. In Modern, it was mostly featured in Birthing Pod and Jund decks. It eventually became clear that the card was too good for the format, though, and it got banned in February of 2014. In the short time it was legal in the format, it amassed 40 points, so banning it was probably a good call. It continued to be legal in Legacy though, where it was primarily featured in Delver decks. Just like in Modern, Deathrite Shaman eventually proved to be too much of a problem for Legacy, and it got banned there in July of 2018. It does remain legal in Pioneer and Vintage, and those are two formats where it is still seeing significant play. In Pioneer, it's usually played alongside Niv Mizzet Reborn, and in Vintage, it has been the most successful in graveyard decks, like Bazaar Aggro. You just can't keep Deathrite Shaman down, and it's going to keep on gaining points going forward, and it will probably be able to continue to outpace Stoneforge Mystic. So those are the top 10 1-mana 1/2s. If you're looking to get one or two of them, check out the description where you can find direct Card Kingdom links for every card in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on videos from the past, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.